Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Rick Jackson, senior host and producer for IdeaStream. Pleased to be here to introduce today's forum, a conversation with the Green Party of Ohio gubernatorial candidate, Constance Gadell-Newton, and her running mate, Dr. Brett Joseph. Today's forum is presented by the Ohio Debate Commission. They've invited all 4 gubernatorial candidates to participate in this forum. 3 candidates, Democrat Richard Cordray, Republican Mike DeWine, and Libertarian Travis Irvine, declined to participate. We do have Constance Gadell-Newton with us. She is the Green Party of Ohio's gubernatorial nominee. An Illinois native, Ms. Gadell-Newton graduated from The Ohio State University with degrees in philosophy and women's studies before earning her law degree from Penn State's Dickinson School of Law. She began her career in criminal law in the office of the prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, Netherlands, prosecuting war criminals. Currently, she's an attorney and guardian ad litem in private practice in the Franklin County Courts. She is the co-chair of the Green Party of Ohio and previously served as their nominee for the State House in 2016. Dr. Brett Joseph is her running mate. He currently serves as Sustainable Agricultural Program Coordinator and Permaculture Instructor at the Lorain County Community College and as an adjunct member of the Environmental Studies faculty at Hiram College. For 15 years, Dr. Joseph served as an environmental and international attorney with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration based in Washington, D.C. and Seattle. Since moving back to his native Northeast Ohio in 2005, he's managed a 26-acre farm and advised area schools on eco-literacy curriculum development. A word about the format now. I will talk with both candidates first, then we'll take your questions. If you're watching on the live stream or via cleveland.com or the radio broadcast of 91.7 WVXU, you can tweet your questions to @TheCityClub, and we'll work them in. And with that, a round of applause for our guest, and we'll begin. Thank you both for being here today. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Constance, why are you not a different choice, but the best choice to be Ohio's governor?
Thank you. Well, we are the candidates who really seek to represent the voice of the people in this election. So we have been all over Ohio and speaking with activists and regular people about what they really want in politics. And we've heard and are able to really amplify that voice, that people want universal health care, an end to the mass incarceration in Ohio, a living wage, and things like public transportation. We're also the candidates who stand up for the environment in Ohio. We're the only candidates asking for an immediate moratorium to fracking and injection wells in Ohio. And we want to maintain Ohio's clean water because clean water is our greatest resource. It's a human right. It's something that we can't live without. We cannot purchase our water in bottles. We have to maintain that critical natural resource. And we're running also to promote democracy in Ohio. So while the other major party candidates take corporate donations, we're the only candidates who do not take corporate donations. We get our platform points directly from the people of Ohio. We're really here to listen and to amplify that voice, uncompromised by corporate interests.
Thank you. A lot of the things that you touched on we will get into in depth over the next hour. Thank you for the opening. Dr. Joseph, what makes you qualified? What makes you the best choice to be our next lieutenant governor?
Well, of the choices on the ballot, I mean, there's many talented people around the state that I think could do this job. And one of the problems that we're trying to, as a third party ticket, trying to address is the fact that we have so few really highly qualified people that are stepping up that are not just career politicians. I mean, this election is a case in point. You have two very seasoned politicians, but not a whole lot of diversity. They're both attorney generals, both with 30+ years of, being in electoral politics, but that's not the only form of public service. And so I bring to the table, and part of what I think is added value is a life of working in public service with my feet on the ground, working as a volunteer in community associations and having started several nonprofit organizations, as well as experience working both inside and outside of the government as a member of the civil service and as faculty in the university. So I think in addition to having a diversity of voices as part of our discourse as we go into the election and more choices on the ballot, I think what qualifies a candidate is having a broad diversity of experience, and I think that's what I bring to the table.
Thank you. Were you to be elected, how would you go about working with what we expect to be a majority Republican legislature?
Well, I think so often right now what we're seeing is a highly polarized political system. And we really seek to avoid that by listening to all voices, really hearing from the people, and trying to build consensus on these decisions. So as Green Party candidates, we'll be bringing innovative solutions and trying to work with all sides of the aisle, all politicians, and many citizens groups. So I would also say that if we're elected, that will show that there has been a great sea change in Ohio politics, that the people have spoken about what they really want, and I would be hopeful that the Republicans, the Democrats who are in office would listen, would hear our ideas, and would be convinced that we have innovative solutions to move things forward in Ohio.
With all 5 statewide offices, with the House and the Senate, do you feel like maybe the Republican Party has looked at what's good for them and forgotten about what's good for the people of Ohio, such as the Greens, the Libertarians?
Yes. I think that we're hearing that more and more in politics. As we've traveled around the state, we've heard from people that they feel forgotten by politicians. They're so excited when a Green Party candidate comes to visit them and they hear what we stand for. So I do think that there is a great danger that the political system has been completely bought out by corporate interest. They're taking money from big oil and gas, the big pharmaceutical industries, and they're making their decisions based on those industries instead of the interests of Ohioans.
Let's talk about some of the issues now. Jobs first. They're evaporating in Ohio. How do we deal with industrial expansion and automation that seems to be taking away jobs from so many people?
Yes, that's something that we care greatly about. In Columbus, transportation workers have been very concerned that their jobs will be taken by automated buses. And so workers are something that we really want to stand up for. We propose a value-added tax on those industries that can displace workers and a universal basic income.
So small businesses, small, medium-sized firms are the biggest employers. So oftentimes the dialogue tends to turn on this premise of, what are you going to do for small businesses versus workers, as if the two were interests that were at odds. And we reject that assumption with the kinds of policies that we are advocating in our platform. We can create a win-win situation, but in order to do that, we need to keep, emphasize local economic development, basically building vital communities from the bottom up by addressing the multiple complex problems that are contributing to the vicious cycles of decline in our community and instability to local tax base and so forth. So we can get into the particulars of that, but in essence, in order to create more opportunities for both jobs and for new startups, new entrepreneurial enterprises, more co-ops and so forth, we need to really change our budget priorities to to reinvest in people rather than in those tax abatements and other measures that tend to help Wall Street but don't help the everyday worker.
Additionally, I would say that as we transition to green energy is one of the largest growing industries. And so we would like Ohio to be a leader in green energy, and for there to be a lot of wind turbine manufacturing companies and things that are actually worker-owned and union jobs. So we want to make sure that as the green energy industry grows in Ohio, that benefits Ohioans, that we're creating local companies that will be a boon for Ohio's economy and for the workers, especially focusing on smaller, locally owned green businesses that are actually worker-owned, so the workers are getting the benefit from those industries.
I want to get back to what you said about investing in people, but since you brought up the idea of energy, you've called for an immediate moratorium on fracking and injection wells across Ohio, even as the new Nexus pipeline goes online. It's operational across the state. Is it too late to rein in that industry, or what would you do once in office to change?
Well, I think that the first thing that we need to do is to change the focus of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to focus on conservation rather than exploitation of our natural resources for profit. Currently, our state receives funding per barrel of frack waste that we accept into this state and put in our injection wells. That's something that needs to change. We need to strengthen our Ohio agencies, the OEPA, that oversees these industries. And I think that we absolutely can call a complete moratorium on that industry and change to green energy.
Dr. Joseph, you mentioned investing in people. One of the key phrases of the last 5-6 years is skills gap. We have so many jobs where we don't have the people to fill, and so many people with low-level skills and don't have the jobs to fill them. If your administration is in office, how do you close that gap?
Sure. There are multiple ways to do that. As a professor at the community college, I very much appreciate the role that post-secondary education has as one...
Including VOTEC.
Absolutely including VOTEC. In fact, the whole idea of career technical, which is part of our emphasis in the community college, charges individuals like myself as a program coordinator with spending every day looking at how do we create those pathways from school into careers, and what are the bridges that we need to build through internships, apprenticeships, and so forth. I happen to work in the area of agriculture, but the same applies really across the field. And as well as at the front end, at the high school, we do advocate, and we're not the only ones, this is what we're hearing all around the state, having the vocational education be much more integrated into the high schools so that students get a well-rounded learning and career-ready preparation out of their time in school, rather than what we see right now, which is early kind of segregation between students pursuing a liberal arts path versus a career technical path. So we need to invest in, in education that's much more integrative and much more in keeping with preparing students for the challenges that are ahead. Right now we have, the teaching to the test and so forth is really preparing students for yesterday's challenges, not the future challenges. And the future challenges are going to require a lot of adaptability, a lot of flexibility, and the ability to engage in critical thinking, systems thinking, all these experience-based learning, hands-on learning. All these things can be attained through partnerships between the communities, the private sector, and the schools.
While we're on education, a lot of people would love to follow your course. Ohio State, Penn State, simply can't afford it. They would walk out of there with $100,000 in debt. Ohio is one of the poorest states in terms of what we do to help students. How would you change if you wanted to change that?
Yes, students, every Ohioan really deserves the ability to have a good education. So from preschool to college, we want to have good quality public education that's affordable. We want to wipe out student debt because the student debt in Ohio is is so high that it's really holding back a lot of graduates from home ownership and financial independence. It would be a real boon to our economy to put that money back in the hands of young graduates so that they have the ability to buy a home, to have children, and to move forward in their careers.
Since we're talking education, let's talk about the younger people now. 20 years since the Ohio Supreme Court delivered the first ruling in the DeRolf school funding case, the state continues to rely heavily on local property taxes to pay for education. What would you do to bring Ohio's school funding into line with that court decision?
Thank you. You know, that has been a goal of our campaign, to determine how we are going to do that, to make sure that we have a constitutional school funding model in Ohio. And what I would say is that because of the unequal school funding model, we have a school system that is still racially segregated to this day, and segregated based on economics. So basically, we believe that a large part of this problem, and according to the DeRolf decision, is the funding model based on property taxes. So we need to provide adequate local government funding so that schools are funded and that every school has a budget to work with. We want to make sure that all students in Ohio have a good quality public education.
And I would simply add to that, you know, this is an issue that's very closely tied to the issue of the local government fund, because in both instances, the state has cut back. In the case of the schools, $1 billion of the state allocation of local funding has been cut back under the Kasich administration, notwithstanding the fact that, as Connie mentioned, you know, we have yet to achieve the constitutional requirements as defined 20 years ago by the court. So, you know, we would increase, I mean, the fundamental issue is lack of adequate state funding that is creating too much pressure on the local property taxes, and that in turn contributes to, it's one of those issues that contributes to a cycle of decline, because students then start migrating out of those communities, school choices become limited, and the property tax base in turn becomes destabilized, which further contributes to the problem. So part of addressing the school problem is also addressing measures for community stabilization, so that students and families are more incentivized to stay at home and also to work with the schools at the building level, so that the quality of education is one that attracts families to come in, and that then in turn builds the tax base and addresses the funding issue. We have sources that we can tap into, the value-added tax. You know, there's a lot of ways that a lot of the revenues are being bled out of the state. For example, internet sales, a portion of that can be reprogrammed to contribute to inadequate school funding.
And I would just add to that according to the Policy Matters Ohio website, that tax abatements have cost Ohio schools at least $125 million, with $34 million being taken away from Cleveland schools alone. So that's something that we seriously need to reevaluate. You know, as we're giving these big corporate giveaways, it's taking money away from our educational system and from our healthcare system in Ohio. So that's something that needs to be evaluated and reduced.
We're talking about money just sitting there doing essentially nothing right now. The so-called rainy day fund, would you use that to tap into assistance for education? And we'll talk in a minute about health. Would you use it that way?
Yes, I would to some extent. I think that the rainy day fund is very important to maintain. I think that as we are facing climate change, that there is a possibility that we're going to need some of that in the rainy day fund to deal with climate change and economic issues. But I do think that we have a surplus built up that could potentially be used for education, but that we can also find other funding for education.
If I could just add, there's a principle there. This is meant for economic stabilization. And as you stated in your question, the money's just sitting there. Well, it's not really sitting. It's actually being invested in, you know, in the stock market and so
Right,
forth.
it's growing, hopefully.
Well, hopefully. But the stabilization is a kind of a loaded term. I mean, it's an accurate term, but it's referring to stabilization against the next bubble that's going to go off. The next, the way it was depleted in the recent economic recession. And so, yes, we need to think about the resilience of our communities and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when the next bubble bursts. But when we're looking at what will allow communities to weather the next economic bubble, we're also looking at the issue of resilience. So, we're talking about climate, we're talking about a whole variety of factors that are threatening and making our communities vulnerable. So there's a principle involved that, if we're going to tap into that rainy day fund, which we should, because $2 billion of that money, arguably, can be attributed to also the cutbacks on the local government fund. And this is what you're hearing local governments screaming about all around the state. That should be reinvested in those types of infrastructure improvements and programmatic improvements at the local level that will build social and economic resilience so that the communities, and I'll give you one example, just community-based energy, so that when you have an economic downturn, people can feed themselves, house themselves, heat their homes, and so forth, and they're not going to be teetering on the edge of economic and really existential destitution because of what happens in Wall Street.
I wanted to shift and talk about health a little bit. A large percentage of people across this state say that the opioid epidemic is one of Ohio's greatest current challenges. We were in this room a week ago and a candidate asked the audience who'd been touched by it. Stunning number of people lifted their hands. Yeah. Do you have a plan in place, ready to go day one to help Ohio fight this scourge?
Yes. I believe that one of the most important steps that we can take in the opiate crisis is providing health care for Ohioans. So universal health care is part of our platform, and so many people are desperate to access care. And as a criminal defense attorney, I've worked with many people who have been touched by the opiate epidemic. Many of my clients, many parents who come into the juvenile court system are losing their children because of the opiate crisis. And what I've seen in my practice is that they're desperate to get care. So there are wait lists. There's really not a good access to care. So our proposal is to have a universal health care system and expansive mental health and addiction services to help aid in the opiate crisis.
And on day one, we would convene, building on the existing cabinet level commission that Kasich started, which we think needs to be directly supervised by the governor and or the lieutenant governor, to really break down those silos that prevent having a comprehensive approach to intervention. Also, we need to really change the mindset, and that takes leadership around excessive focus on the punitive aspect versus looking at other ways through, like, for example, diversion programs and so forth, that we can bring people in, but also attending to the follow-up care that is really needed to get beyond just treating people for overdoses in a crisis, but not take the steps needed to keep them from cycling back into the system, which oftentimes is what leads to this high mortality rate. 14 people a day are losing their lives to opioids. It is a true crisis, and we need to treat it as such.
Many state leaders, including the sitting governor and Senator Portman, say expanded Medicaid has been one of the state's best weapons in fighting the opioid crisis. Would you continue to try and expand Medicaid? Would you cut back what he's done? Where are you standing in terms of what the governor's done with Medicaid?
We absolutely want to preserve and expand Medicaid. I think that it's important that everyone have access to health care, and Medicaid has been able to provide a lot of health care for people to meet their needs.
What about the clause that people should work more to be eligible?
My feeling is that creates administrative barriers for people to be able to access care. So a lot of people who are on Medicaid may not be able to handle the paperwork that's involved, and I think setting up additional hurdles for people to access care is, frankly, the wrong way to move forward.
It's been slow to get going, but you are in favor of legalized and decriminalized marijuana, medicinal first? What would you like to do as governor to advance that?
Yes, thank you. So currently the medicinal marijuana program, as it's been rolled out, it's not been implemented effectively at all. So that would be something that we need to ensure that the implementation goes smoother, that places are able to get their licenses and get up and running. And we are also for decriminalization and legalization of recreational marijuana. That's something that those licenses can be handled by the Department of Commerce, similar to the licensing scheme for beer. And we would want to have reasonable pricing for those licenses so that those could be accessible to a variety of business owners. We don't want it to just be mega millionaires who are able to profit from that. Also, the decriminalization of possession, of course, is important in that. And we're also for industrial hemp. That's something that isn't as often talked about, but industrial hemp is an amazing renewable resource, and it's something that can benefit Ohio farmers and industry in Ohio. So many products can be made out of industrial hemp. It's something that can take the place of many plastics and help with our plastic pollution problem that we have in Ohio.
I haven't heard really any of the four of you talk a lot about transportation lately. Governor Kasich turned down the idea of the 3 C's train, which you supported. Would you effort bringing back that idea?
Absolutely. I think that a high-speed train would really benefit Ohioans. First, we'd love to connect the 3 C's, so Cincinnati to Columbus to Cleveland, but we shouldn't stop there. We also need to connect Toledo and Akron and Dayton, Ohio, and go all over Ohio. This is something that can benefit workers in a commute. It can help business. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of workers working on creating that high-speed train and working to maintain it. And this, unfortunately for Ohio, I really believe that Kasich made the wrong decision for business, the wrong decision for workers, and the environment by turning down the train. Obviously, we need public transportation to have a more eco-friendly transportation system in Ohio, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and to diversify our transportation infrastructure in Ohio.
Still a little pie in the sky. People talk about the Hyperloop idea. Would you be in favor of continuing investigation into, be it Cleveland, Chicago, or Columbus, Pittsburgh, either way? Would you want to see a Hyperloop investigated for Ohio?
I think that it is important to connect Ohio's cities to the other cities.
Yeah, and we need to close the gap between the demand in public transit versus the amount of investment. In the current budget, we're only investing $40 million, where the demand is calling for 120 to 180
in the existing systems.
In the existing systems, and an effective public transportation system is one that's diversified. So, the equity issues need to be made front and center in terms of involving the community in decisions where each level of that system is going to be created between the light rails, the commuter rails, the connecting bus routes, and so forth. So, yes, a high-speed rail is really important, but it needs to be part of an overall investment in creating a energy-saving and economically boosting public transit system that will really be that with other investments in the infrastructure that where Ohio's been lagging behind will launch us into a 21st century economy. We're now 45th among states in investment in public transportation, and so that's a priority for our administration to turn that around.
In your opening statement, you talked about the clean water and the need for that. We're sitting 6 blocks from Lake Erie. What would you do when elected to make sure that that lake stays cleaner than it has been in past years?
Yes, we need a clean Lake Erie and clean waterways in Ohio. We need to work with farmers to make sure that we have good agricultural practices that's going to work for them and to protect the environment.
This is another one of those complex issues. There's been a lot of study, but not a whole lot of action. particularly on the algae bloom issue. We had improvements in Lake Erie, now it seems like we're slipping backwards. So we need to work with our interstate partners, as well as this is an international issue. We're all sharing a single watershed. And we need to appreciate the fact that Lake Erie is, is a very rare, very precious global resource for us. And we have a fishing industry that is very important, and that we need to look at the multiple ecological services that this provides. To address that, it can't all be on the backs of the farmers, but the farmers have a role to play in that.
Today we are listening to a forum with the Green Party of Ohio gubernatorial candidate Constance Gadell-Newton and her running mate, Dr. Brett Joseph. We're about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining via our live streams. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will try and work it into the program. Holding the microphone today, Content Coordinator Bliss Davis. Bliss, may we have the first question, please?
If elected governor and lieutenant governor, what would you do to make Ohio a more welcoming place for immigrants, both documented and undocumented?
Thank you. We recognize the great benefit that immigrants bring to Ohio in terms of our workforce and the culture in Ohio. And I think that we would like to make Ohio a sanctuary state to make sure that all Ohioans, including documented and undocumented immigrants, have a safe and welcoming place in Ohio. We would have a policy of non-cooperation with ICE on deportations. And what I would say about that is many local police departments are complaining that as a public safety matter, they do not want to cooperate with turning people over to ICE because people are afraid to report crimes, domestic violence, and other issues. So in order for our local police departments to be able to do what they need, we would leave that to their discretion.
We need to treat this issue as an issue that affects more than the undocumented workers. It's affecting whole communities because of the chill effect that these ICE raids place on the willingness of women that are suffering from domestic violence, other members of the community have in availing themselves of public services. It's placing a pall of fear over entire communities, such as where I live in Paynesville and elsewhere. The non-cooperation we need with the ICE raids is part of not aggravating that those ripple effects. But in addition, we need to invest in outreach, a lot more services to make sure that the rights of all individuals that are caught up in these dragnets is protected. And there's some really amazing work being done by the coalition of groups, the Interfaith Alliance and others that are really tackling this issue. We need the state to get behind them and to facilitate those kind of work, unless and until we get a clear pathway that has evaded the Congress and the federal government, clear pathway to citizenship, which is really the ultimate solution. So we have a role to play in the state to advance that agenda, but we also need to call out these efforts to vilify the veterans, because we know that that's really the bottom line. This is xenophobia, and you have politicians that are making political capital out of finding the most vulnerable members of our society. And so we will speak to that issue from day one.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi. What is your position on licensed social workers allowing unlicensed case manager workers working under the agency's license to take children and put them in foster care?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that I know about that issue specifically. I am a guardian ad litem, and okay. Yeah, I do work in the juvenile courts, and so I am very aware of the issues surrounding family separation through the foster care system. So, you know, I would like to really see a focus on addressing the needs in a preventative way to make sure that families can meet the needs of their children. And you know, currently, I don't believe that our foster care system or that the service providers that work with them really have enough funding to actually meet the needs of children and families. I think that we need a family-focused approach that is not focused on removing children, but on reuniting families and ensuring that families have the resources that they need to have housing, to you know, to have health care, including mental health and rehabilitation services, and that caseworkers need to have a focus on working with the families with good intentions to move forward and keep families together when possible.
Very quickly, there's a balance to be struck here, because right now we have a caseload that is really overwhelming the system. And so if we were to immediately require that only licensed social workers could be caseworkers, there may not be a supply for that. The near-term solution may be to strengthen and really improve the oversight of someone with a license, of those that are the caseworkers. But we want to avoid creating another problem by raising the standards. There needs to be accountability throughout the system, and so a commitment to further professional development of all caseworkers needs to be part of the equation.
As Ms. Gadell-Newton is involved intimately in this, let me follow the foster care question with the idea that right now in Ohio at 21, kids age out of the system. We essentially just dump them on the streets as it is. As governor, would you like to push that number to 25 or 26? What would you like to see done to help these kids that age out of the system and have nowhere to go?
Absolutely. You know, I remember when I was in my early 20s, and I had so many advantages of coming from a good family who loved me and got me prepared to go to college. And I even lived with my stepfather throughout college, and that was a great benefit for me. That helped me succeed in college. After I graduated from college, I moved out of my father's home, and it was a huge shock to start paying my own bills, to work, to be responsible for everything. And so I can only imagine the stress on an 18 or 19-year-old child who has been released from the foster care system. And I do think that we need to continue to provide services for young people throughout their 20s who don't have a family structure. So I would absolutely be in favor of pushing that number up to 25 or 26. I know that children who go through the foster system often are eligible for college, and I think that's a wonderful thing for college funding. We need to definitely maintain that and continue providing those benefits, but I would add that healthcare benefits should be part of that, and assistance with housing to make sure that they have their basic needs met, and to make sure that they are able to meet their basic needs without stumbling along their way.
Thank you. Next question.
What kind of policies would you create to help mentally ill people adjust to the community so they can avoid jail time?
Okay, thank you. We need to provide expansive mental health and addiction services to all. And I think that that is something that we can provide through our administration.
Yes, access to community mental health services is really essential. As formerly as a solo practitioner, a very large proportion of my clients really were coming into legal entanglements when really the issue was mental health, and we've seen this all over the state. And then when that happens, there's no one to hand them off to other than a lot of red tape that they have to go through to get any kind of coverage. So what we need is a diversified mental health system that is inclusive of the kind of interventions that can allow for tracking and prevention of these issues before they get out of control and break up and destroy families and lives. So adequate resources, more engagement with the available services that are there through funding mechanisms that will provide access. This is part of our plan for including mental health services as part of the basic set of medical services available through comprehensive single-payer healthcare system. That would be a big step in solving this problem.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm a young person, and I actually haven't heard that much about the Green Party. What separates the Green Party from like Cordray and DeWine, the Republicans and the Democrats?
Well, we got into this race in order to bring issues that are being discussed and vetted at the community level. In other words, the kind of issue campaigns that you see happening all around the state are what the Green Party is really representing. We are a people-driven party, and because we don't accept any corporate campaign finance and are not therefore beholden to big ag or big farm and the other lobbying interests, we are able to speak to those issues and propose those systemic solutions to get to the root causes of a lot of our problems, such as what we've been discussing here. So that's really the main thing that we're bringing to the table is an effort to broaden the range of choices and to speak to those issues that really affect people in their daily lives, and also to change the whole discourse. You know, we're caught up in this zero-sum gridlock between the two major parties that is a big part of the reason that, in addition to the gerrymandering and these other dysfunctions in our political system that are preventing the solutions that are waiting from happening to happen. So the Green Party, and the way we're doing this campaign is to not necessarily expect that everyone wave the green flag, but certainly to reach out and form coalitions across the divisions that are keeping our society back.
Thank you. And the Green Party is a party that formed out of the environmental movement of the 1970s. So we are strongly focused on environmental issues, but we're not a single issue party. We're also a party of social justice and diversity and grassroots democracy. So we really want to bring democracy back to the people through a grassroots system of outreach around Ohio. We want people to join from across the political spectrum. If you feel like you agree with the 10 key values of the Green Party. And I would also say on youth issues that the Youth Caucus of the Green Party recently influenced the party platform to be an eco-socialist party. So that's something that we are listening to young people, and we have, as the new party that is building and growing in Ohio, we have the ability to bring in young people and to give you opportunities for leadership, to run for office, and we're fully open to young people becoming involved and taking positions of leadership.
Brett, let me follow what you said. You talked about the idea of a third party. Always wanting to topple the two-party system. It's inherent in your name, of course. Do you have a plan that would open elections to make it more free, more viable for people to choose Libertarian, to choose Green when they go to the polls?
Well, this will probably take a ballot initiative. We're looking towards 2020, but yes, we do support a ranked choice voting system. Preference voting is another version of that. In addition to proportional representation in the legislative bodies. These voting systems have been effectively utilized in other jurisdictions. Ranked choice, in the case of Maine, has been pioneering that. Mm-hmm. And basically, for those who haven't heard of ranked choice voting, what it is it's the proposition that when you go into the voting booth, you should be able to vote in order of preference to those candidates that are on the ballot that you prefer, without having to worry about having your vote not count, or worse yet, having the candidate that is your least preferred choice get elected because you somehow split the vote. And we're at a place right now where we need to consider that that's a longer term, well, I should say it should be a near-term solution, but it's something that will take a lot of grassroots mobilization to get through, because there's interest in the two major parties to keep the status quo. Mm-hmm. And that status quo is not serving our democracy, because we hear again and again, and this accounts for a lot of the low voter turnout, that I don't like the choices. Why should I vote? I don't feel like my vote matters. If I vote for the candidate of my choice, I'm going to elect the other guy that I don't want. And so that's a problem in the structure of the system that can be cured in large part by going to ranked choice voting.
Yeah, this is something that we really feel that people from across the political spectrum can get behind. So we could do a ballot initiative that would be supported by Green Party members, by Libertarians, by Progressive Democrats, by Republicans, and of the vast 70% of unaffiliated voters in Ohio who are wanting that additional choice. There's such a low voter turnout in most elections that most elections are determined by 30% of voters, and only half of those voting for the winning candidate. So we'd really like to see a voting system that actually represents the will of the people. And I believe that we're good enough at math and that we're strong enough and smart enough that we can figure out that system that is actually going to represent the will of the people, and that's something that we can get together and work on across party lines and come up with a better voting system for Ohio that will really strengthen our democracy as we elect leaders that really represent the voice of the people and the political will and desire of the voters.
I'm going to ask a final question and then leave time for the candidates to give a closing statement. You've talked a lot of times here about what you would like to see more money spent on, a reprioritizing of public investment, as it were. If something wins, something has to lose. What in Ohio is getting too much money that you, as governor, would slice?
Thank you. Well, that is a great question. Right now, I think what we see is so much money being wasted through fraud and abuse and corporate giveaways. So tax abatements are bleeding our schools currently. We give away $125 million in tax abatements. And basically what we have is a political system of kickbacks and, I think what we need to do is really prioritize these things, prioritize the people of Ohio. We have enough money in our system to pay for what we want. As far as universal health care, the cost savings in the administrative savings alone would pay for universal health care for the people. The problem is that greedy corporations are taking that money, and you see that happening in the charter school industry as well, in the private prison industry. There's so much profit that is actually leaving our state and being extracted, wealth that's being extracted from working class people. So that's really where we want the change. I think that it's a matter of priorities. We need to stop giving our money away to the wealthiest 1% and keep it with the people.
Doctor, anything to add?
Yeah, real quickly, we need to remember that a budget document is a policy document. It's not just a simple zero-sum exercise in a balance sheet. We are constitutionally required to balance the budget, and the only way we do that is by establishing priorities that are also good investments for the people of Ohio. So when we invest in a local food infrastructure, when we invest in electric vehicle infrastructure, so that we can get ahead of that industry that is coming and that is emerging. If we invest in 100% renewable energy, that half of our energy expenditures is in transportation, and almost all of that is being shipped out of state. We are literally bleeding money from our tax revenues, as well as through these these corporate tax abatements that when you export a product out of state, you're not getting any kind of a sales tax out of it. That's hurting the local governments, especially. So our budget document is really an economic development document, and it has to be one that has the principle that applies across all budget categories of putting people first.
It's not a debate, so we don't have a timed closing statement, but take a minute to 90 seconds. Lieutenant Governor, you may go first.
Sure. Thanks again to the City Club and to the Debate Commission for hosting us. I've really enjoyed this conversation. This is an important moment in our state's history. We've spoken to some of the major challenges that we're facing, and the fact that the quick fix solutions that we've tried again and again, like the war on drugs and the punitive approaches to criminal justice. We need to start thinking more broadly about how to address these issues, recognizing that at best what we can do is to seize opportunities that will turn some of these cycles of decline that we're seeing in our communities into virtual cycles. With every challenge, there is a hidden opportunity if we look far enough. And so our Green Party platform and the reason that I think that it's very important to get out the vote and to really use this choice wisely, not just to respond to fear or to threats like you're going to divide the vote, but to really think about the vote that has been fought for with blood, sweat, and tears over the years, that we need to make that vote count, and we need to use it to fix these deeper systemic problems that are plaguing our communities, because we have a future, we have a vision for Ohio, a green future, a sustainable future, a future that's socially just, and it is within our reach if we just have the political will to make it happen.
Thank you. Ms. Gadell-Newton.
Thank you. Thank you to the Cleveland City Club for hosting this event. When I first heard that there was a debate commission forming to ensure fair debates, I was excited and hopeful that I and the other minor parties would be included in that. It soon became clear that we were not going to be included in the debates. And I strongly believe that that is an injury to voters who want to hear from all the candidates and who want to hear from a female candidate. I'm the only female candidate in this race representing women, representing environmental issues and issues around the criminal justice system and prison industrial complex and our educational issues. The Green Party stands for grassroots democracy, and we truly want to represent the people of Ohio in this race. We're the only party that does not take corporate donations, and we have an activist-informed campaign. So many of our issues, our platform positions, have been researched based on work that has already been done for us by nonprofits, by activist groups who really focus on these issues. So we're very hopeful as we move forward, to be creating a green future and political alternatives in Ohio. And we welcome you to become a part of the Green Party, to be involved at the grassroots level. And we are really trying to come up with community solutions so that people have the ability to work in their communities for the greater good. We're also working to ensure that we have a democracy that works for the people of Ohio, something that's not based on corporate kickbacks and corporate donations. This is something that is important for our democracy, to make sure that the things that we want, like clean water, like a criminal justice system that actually works for the people of Ohio, and an educational system that works for the children of Ohio. This is something that we need to move that forward. And I would just also add that we have so many children living in poverty in Ohio. No child should ever go hungry in Ohio, which is a land of farmland and abundance. We have enough farmland to feed all children in Ohio, but we really need to look at how we allocate those resources to make sure that our people here in Ohio locally are taken care of, that we're not squandering our greatest resources, water, our farmland, just for a profit, so that the top 1% can line their pockets at our expense. So that's really what this campaign is about. It's about bringing it to the people and standing up for a green future that is people-focused in Ohio.
Thank you both. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a forum with the Green Party of Ohio gubernatorial candidate Constance Gadell-Newton and her running mate, Dr. Brett Joseph. Today's forum is presented by the Ohio Debate Commission, which is funded by the City Club of Cleveland, the Shar and Chuck Fowler Family Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, Cleveland State University, the George Gund Foundation, IdeaStream, and the Nord Family Foundation. Thank you for your support. Additionally, we welcome guest at tables hosted by the Green Party of Ohio. We thank you all for being here today. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Ms. Gadell-Newton and Dr. Joseph. I'm Rick Jackson. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.